Hello and welcome to our video on seaming using Mattress Stitch. So this is a child's hat and we've gathered it up at the top, put several stitches through the top to make sure it stays secure, and now we're ready to stitch down the side. Mattress stitching is straightforward. It actually makes, for me, I love mattress stitching, so I prefer to knit flat now rather than in the round, just so I can do some mattress stitching. The thing with stripes you have to be careful is to keep these stripes aligned, because it's so easy to get out of step and have the stripes so that you've got a step going from that edge stitch in the seam to one up there, and it looks awful. So what we want to do is avoid that, but just how we start off is make sure that our stitches are slightly out of line, actually, strangely, that we're always got one lead stitch in the head. So this, we're about to do our first stitch, and before we start, let's look at the seam line we're going to take. We've got the outer stitch, which is right here, and the second stitch inside of it, which is here. So we want to take our seam line down between the first and the second stitches. How can you tell which is which stitch? Well, if you're working from the top and you're using stocking stitch, your V, that's one stitch just there. So, and then there's another stitch outside of it. So we want to work through, that is the V there. So we want to work through the horizontal stitch below it. However, when we stitch, we like to go through two. There's two ways. You can either be very neat and do mattress stitching going through one horizontal stitch at a time, or through two. I like to work a bit quicker, so I'm always going to go through two, except when I'm trying to line them up at the start. This should be fine, and I shall show you more as we move down. So here, this was where we ended up. One stitch, two stitches. So we're looking to pick out the horizontal bars. It's quite easy once you've got your line going. One stitch, two stitch. You don't have to pull it tight, because that's the joy. I'm purposefully leaving it quite loose to show you the joy. We're going to go through. There's the edge stitch and there's the first stitch in. We're going to go between the two. Now we're coming to a change of colour. What we want to do is always have the lead stitch alternating. So here we're on our last silver colour or grey colour, and we're going to go into the pink here, which has a horizontal silver bar, but we're in the pink. On this side, we need to make sure that we're going down one step beyond. Now we're not, so all I'm going to do to fix that, to get in line for the future, is go down three. You can either do that by fix. It doesn't make any difference in the long run. Just now we should be okay. So we've got the pink, and then we're into the blues. This one, we're in the blue, and one stitch beyond. And then through that stitch, through the second stitch. So it's almost through that stitch, through the next stitch. Now here we're on the last blue stitch, and then the first pink, which has a blue horizontal. And here we should be on the first pink stitch with a blue horizontal, and then the second pink stitch, because we're always alternating the lead. We're on the last of that colour, first of the next colour. So it's very exciting. I'm trying to hold off pulling it tight because it's the most fun thing. Well, no, there are lots more fun things, but quite exciting in terms of knitting. How you go, you've got this great big, so obviously a seam, so obviously a seam. So I'm going to pull it tight now for a moment of panic. It's not going to go. And then you can see, keep pulling. still quite loose at the top. Can you see the stitches at the top? So what I tend to do is pull a little bit too far so it gets pulled up. But then I really, really make sure that I pull it out. Now, who can see the seam? Oh my gosh. Actually, I can, but only because I've got my eye, and I think that's quite good. So then you carry on exactly as we've done, all the way down to the bottom and tie it off at the bottom. We will work quickly down this, and as in quickly, we'll speed it up and show you how to finish it off at the bottom. So welcome back to the very last few stitches. We are nearly at the bottom. Just as a reminder, we're looking at going from between the very edge stitch and the stitch next to it. We're going down the horizontal bar between the two, and we're always swapping the lead stitch around. So that's going to be in the two silver ones. That's in silver onto the pink. I always slightly panic at the end and think, goodness, it all looks much longer on one side than the other. But it normally works out all right because that's the nature of knitting. And that's right. All the way down. Love it, love it, love it. Those last few stitches are obviously my favourite. And the project's nearly over. And we're at the bottom there. Now, 1, 2. All we're doing at the bottom, before we just do the last stitch, let's pull it in as we've done before. Make sure that that's not rucked up, that the seam is straight and it's quite loose. And all we've got to do at the bottom, it looks slightly as though that I finished unevenly, but obviously I can't have done because it's a stripe and there's the same number of rows on each. So we've just got to, I start at the very end, I start just to make sure that I'm getting up this last knob at the bottom. And then this side we were a stitch behind, so we go 1 and then pick up that last knob at the bottom. And then we're going to do, because it had 3 colours in, we're going to have a little bit of weaving in to do. We've done a separate video on weaving in, but let's just look at the different ways. One way is you simply go up through the seam here, up through the seam, which I am going to do with one of these colours, but because we've got 4 different lengths here, I don't want to make the seam 4 times as thick as it should be. So actually what I'm going to do is with this particular one, I'm just going to weave it in, which I do by picking up and twisting around, twisting through one part. Shouldn't be able to see it at the front, completely invisible at the front. And then I like to change direction. I don't think you necessarily need to, but I'm always looking to weave it in under 8 stitches as a guide, not necessarily not a rule, just a guide. So maybe in there and there, go through there, and then we can snip that off. Meanwhile, this is what the inside looks like. It's a tiny, tiny seam. It looks great. More importantly, that's what the outside looks like. And that is mattress stitching on a stripe. Thank you all.